They say that life begins to shrink as we grow older, that the walls close in and the world gets a little quieter. But for some women, like her, that quiet space became something sacred. At 70 years old, after years of change, loss, and transition, she chose to live differently. Not just in a new house, but in a new way. She didn't move into a senior living facility. She didn't stay in a large empty home filled with echoes of the past. She chose something smaller, simpler, more meaningful. A tiny home, tucked just behind her daughter's house, became the place where she found herself again. It did not have grand staircases or walk-in closets. It didn't need to. What it did have was enough. Enough peace, enough safety, enough warmth. Enough space for a woman who had spent most of her life making room for others, now finally making space for herself. This is not a story about downsizing. It is a story about right-sizing, about choosing peace over pressure, presence over perfection, and simplicity over noise. It is a story of a woman who, at 70 years old, started a new chapter and found something many spend a lifetime chasing. She found home, and maybe, just maybe, you can too. 1. The bigger the house, the lonelier the heart. She had everything most people think they want. A big house, 16 rooms, high ceilings, polished floors, and wide windows that caught the morning light just right. For many years, that home was more than just a place to live. It was a reflection of the life she had built with the man she loved. Her husband had a warm, steady laugh that could turn any ordinary day into something memorable. Together, they made that house feel alive. They cooked Sunday dinners, decorated the porch every fall, and danced slowly in the living room after the grandkids went home. Life was full, noisy, beautiful. But then, everything changed. He passed away, and suddenly, what used to be home began to feel like a museum. The house did not get smaller, but her world did. Each room, once full of meaning, now echoed with absence. The kitchen stayed clean, not because she was too tidy, but because she no longer cooked for anyone. The dining table sat untouched. The upstairs guest room still held the blanket her granddaughter had left behind, but the child's laughter no longer ran through the halls. Some doors she stopped opening altogether, not because she forgot, but because it simply hurt too much to remember. She tried to adjust. She told herself to stay strong. After all, this was the house they built together, brick by brick, year after year. But with every passing day, it became harder to ignore the truth. The house had become too big for one heart to carry. And in that growing silence, she realized something. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She was afraid of holding on to a life that no longer fit. When she moved to the high-rise, it felt practical, modern, easier. The maintenance was gone, and she no longer had to worry about mowing lawns or fixing leaky faucets. But something else went missing too. Warmth, connection, that subtle feeling of belonging. The building was clean, the hallways quiet, and the neighbors polite, but distant. She missed waving to someone across the fence. She missed the way her old home lit up when the afternoon sun hit the curtains just right. Mostly, she missed feeling like herself. For a long time, she thought, maybe this is just how things are when you get older. You trade space for silence. You trade family for memory. You get used to living in a smaller version of your old life. But deep inside, something kept whispering, there has to be a better way, a gentler way, a way of living that honors the past but makes room for peace. She didn't know it yet, but that whisper would soon lead her somewhere unexpected, not into a new neighborhood, not into another apartment, but into a tiny space with a very big purpose. 2. A small suggestion, a life-changing shift. It started with a simple conversation on a quiet afternoon. Her daughter had come by with groceries and a few extra hugs, something she often did without needing a reason. They were sitting at the kitchen table of that high-rise apartment, sipping tea that had gone lukewarm, talking about everything and nothing. And then her daughter said it, gently, casually, like it was just another passing thought. "Mom, have you ever thought about getting a tiny home?" At first, she laughed, not because it was silly, but because it felt impossible. Tiny homes were for young adventurers or off-grid dreamers, not a 70-year-old widow who still missed the weight of a hand beside hers. But the seed was planted. Later that night, long after the apartment had settled into its usual quiet hum, she opened her laptop and started searching. She typed the words slowly, tiny homes for seniors, not really expecting much. But what she found surprised her. There were entire communities built around the idea of living smaller, living simpler, and living with intention. There were videos of women her age giving tours of cozy, light-filled spaces, not cluttered or cramped, but peaceful, organized, safe, personal. The next weekend, her daughter took her to see a few in person. They walked through models, some too small, some too modern. But then they stepped into one that made her stop. It was not fancy. It did not sparkle. But it felt right. The kitchen was shaped just like the one she had back in Arlington, where she used to make pot roast every Sunday. The windows faced west, where the sun would pour in during golden hour. There was even a little porch, just wide enough for 2 chairs and a flower box. She didn't need to think about it long. Within weeks, the decision was made. She paid for it in full, $73,000, and had it delivered straight to a patch of land behind her daughter's house. She had never spent money so confidently in her life. It was not just a purchase, it was a quiet declaration. I still deserve a home that feels like mine. Moving in was not without its challenges. She had to let go of many things. Dishes she never used, boxes of decorations, furniture with more memory than purpose. But with every item she gave away or donated, she felt a little lighter. What stayed were the things that mattered. Her mother's old quilt, the painting her granddaughter made in 3rd grade, the kettle she used every morning without fail. And when moving day came, she stood on that little porch, looked out across the grass toward her daughter's home, and smiled. It was not the life she had planned, but it was the life that had quietly waited for her to be ready. She didn't know it then, but that small suggestion, spoken over lukewarm tea, was about to lead her into the most peaceful chapter of her life. 3. The kitchen that feels like home. She had lived in many kitchens over the years, some grand and filled with guests, some quiet and mostly unused. But this one, this small, humble kitchen tucked into her tiny home, felt more like home than any of them ever had. The first time she stepped into it, she gasped. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it was familiar. The layout mirrored the kitchen she had back in Arlington, the one she cooked in for nearly 3 decades. The same cozy U-shape, the same way the light came through the window just above the sink. It was almost like someone had built it straight from her memory. That small detail gave her comfort in ways she could not explain. It was like meeting an old friend again after many years apart. Every inch of this kitchen had a purpose. The sink was large, intentionally so. She had chosen it because she knew the small ones only looked cute until you had dishes to wash. The counters, though narrow, were just enough for the meals she prepared for herself. She didn't need 4 burners. She mostly used 1. So she kept a small, reliable cooktop and used the rest of the space for prepping, baking, and sometimes painting. There was a tiny oven, though she rarely used it. Her favorite tool? A countertop cooker she had ordered online. It was simple, dependable, and made just enough for one. Sometimes, she joked that it knew her better than most people did. But this kitchen wasn't just where she cooked. It was where her days began, with tea steeping quietly in a chipped mug. It was where she wrote notes to herself, to her grandchildren, to no one in particular. It was where she created, whether that meant a warm pie, a small watercolor, or a quiet moment of reflection. Everything was within reach. Everything had a place, and everything carried meaning. The pantry was deep, built to hold exactly what she needed, and no more. No wasted space, no clutter. Just dry goods, a few emergency tins, some favorite snacks, and supplies neatly tucked into labeled bins. For a woman who once kept a full walk-in pantry with more ingredients than she could use in a year, this small corner now felt like freedom. She had learned how little she truly needed, and how much joy came from using what she had well. When visitors came, her daughter, a curious neighbor, or her old friend from church, they always remarked on how cozy it felt in there. She would smile, wipe her hands on her apron, and say, "This is where my life begins and ends every day, right here, in this little kitchen." And it was true. It was not just a room for food. It was the heartbeat of her home, a place where memory lived in the scent of cinnamon, where love simmered slowly on the stove, where she felt like herself again, every single day. In a world that often told her she was aging out of usefulness, this tiny kitchen reminded her, softly and faithfully, that she still had purpose, that she still had flavor to give, and that some of the most beautiful things in life happen right at the stove. 4. Safety, dignity, and the quiet power of a bathroom. There are parts of a house people rarely talk about, not in detail anyway. Bathrooms are usually mentioned in numbers, 1.5, 2 full, maybe 3. But for her, this little bathroom in her tiny home had become a sanctuary. It was the very first space that caught her eye when she toured the model. Tucked into a corner, it seemed impossibly small. And yet, everything was exactly where it needed to be. The sink was just the right height. The mirror framed her face gently. The soft light made her skin look like it did years ago. And the shower, the shower, was clean, spacious, and best of all, safe. After all the years of worrying about slippery tiles and cold floors, she had finally found a space that seemed to have been built with her in mind. There were grab bars on both sides, positioned not just for convenience, but for peace of mind. A small seat waited in the corner, where she could sit and breathe in the steam without rushing. The water warmed her bones, softened her muscles, and wrapped her in comfort. She often lingered there, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. There was a window, small and frosted, letting in just enough natural light to remind her of the outside world, but never too much to make her feel exposed. She remembered slipping once, just once, back in the high-rise. No major injury, just a scare. But ever since, the fear stayed with her. That sudden helplessness, that panic of not being able to get up. Here in this bathroom, that fear had no place. There was a handle by the toilet, one near the towel rack, another just outside the door. She had even installed one near the bed, just in case. Not because she felt old, but because she felt smart. She had learned over time that dignity is not about pretending to be strong. It is about setting yourself up so you do not have to prove it every day. The smallness of the space helped too. There was no reaching too far, no stretching to grab a towel. Everything she needed was within arm's length, and that, in itself, was freedom. On the counter sat her few essentials, her favorite lavender lotion, a jar of cotton swabs, a comb passed down from her mother. She kept things simple, uncluttered. Not because she lacked interest, but because she had finally figured out what mattered. Getting ready was no longer a task. It was a ritual. She brushed her hair slowly, applied a bit of tinted lip balm, just because. Some mornings, she even put on earrings, small silver hoops her husband once gave her, tucked in the top drawer for decades. "Do it for yourself," she whispered once in the mirror, and then smiled, because she meant it. This bathroom did not make her feel fragile. It made her feel cared for. And that's something many women forget to ask for as they grow older. Not just safety, but softness. Not just design, but dignity. This little room, barely big enough to turn around in, gave her both. And every time she stepped out, wrapped in a warm towel, she felt just a little more whole. 5. The bedroom that heals. Her bedroom was the quietest space in the house, not just because of its location, but because of what it held and what it didn't. There was no television, no ticking clock, no distractions, only stillness. It was a small room by any standard. A single bed, a nightstand, a reading lamp, a window covered with a soft shade, and a chair in the corner that had grown to know the shape of her body. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in something far greater: peace. For years, sleep had been difficult. In the big house, the bedroom had felt cold at night, not just in temperature, but in spirit. It was too quiet in the wrong kind of way, too full of memories she wasn't ready to face. The high-rise apartment offered better lighting, modern touches, even central air. But the bed never quite felt like her own. The walls were thin, and she could hear footsteps above her long after she had closed her eyes. But here in her tiny home, night was different. The walls seemed to breathe with her. The room felt warm even before she turned on the lamp, and when she lay down each night, the mattress welcomed her like an old friend, cradling her shoulders, easing the ache in her hips, reminding her that she was safe. She always kept the window cracked just slightly, not enough to let in the cold, but just enough to hear the world outside, the wind in the trees, the occasional owl, the far-off sound of her daughter closing up for the night in the main house. There was something deeply comforting in that small distance. They were close, but not too close. Independent, but never alone. In the top drawer of her nightstand, she kept a few quiet treasures: a photo of her husband, taken before the gray had reached his beard; a well-worn paperback she'd read 5 times, but still returned to on restless nights; a notepad for dreams she wanted to remember or thoughts too tender to say aloud. Every night followed a rhythm. She would wash up, pull back the covers, sit on the edge of the bed and give thanks. Not always in words, but in feeling. Gratitude, she had learned, was best expressed in silence. She did not mourn the life she used to have, not anymore. Instead, she honored it by creating something gentler with the years she still had. Some nights, she dreamed of her husband, walking through a garden they never planted, laughing beside her as if no time had passed. Those dreams did not make her sad. They felt like visits, like reminders that love does not end just because someone is gone. This room held those dreams. This room held her. It was not just a place to rest. It was a space to restore, to gather strength, to remember who she had been and who she still was. And when morning light crept through the window, soft and golden, she would rise slowly, stretch gently, and whisper to herself, "Another day, another chance to live simply and fully." 6. The living room that holds her spirit. At first, she didn't know what to do with the space. The living room in her tiny home was, by most standards, barely more than a corner. It had no fireplace, no grand sofa, no room for all the things she once believed a proper living room should have. But slowly, over the months, and then over the years, it became something more meaningful than any room she had ever decorated before. It became hers. There was a small bookshelf, barely waist-high, where she kept her favorite novels and a few old journals. Her reading chair sat nearby, perfectly positioned beneath a warm lamp, with soft yellow light that never flickered, never buzzed. On the wall, a simple display board held pieces of her artwork, tiny watercolors, pencil sketches, collages made from old newspaper cuttings. There was not much space, but every inch told a story. Some afternoons, she would sit there with a cup of peppermint tea, flipping through the pages of a novel she had already read but loved anyway. Other times, she would just stare at her art, listening to the creak of the wood under her feet, feeling the weight of stillness settle gently around her. She remembered the studio she once had in the mansion, an entire basement with natural light, hardwood floors, cabinets full of supplies. But strangely, this little living room, barely wide enough for 2 chairs and a side table, had become a more honest space for creation. There was something about its smallness that brought clarity. No distractions, no clutter, no pressure to make anything grand. Just time, space, and the freedom to let herself feel. The room had changed too, in small, gradual ways. A different rug one year, a hand-me-down side table the next. A few things came and went, but the spirit of the room stayed the same. Warm, accepting, deeply personal. Here she didn't have to entertain guests or impress anyone. She just had to show up as herself. And in this season of life, that felt like the greatest relief of all. Sometimes, when she looked around, she marveled at how little she missed the things she once thought were essential. She didn't miss the oversized couch that swallowed her whole. She didn't miss the television that never stopped talking. She didn't miss the walls lined with items she never truly looked at. What she did miss sometimes were the people. But even there, the room made space. There were photographs tucked into the corners of the bookshelf. A handwritten note from her granddaughter taped beside the lamp. A postcard from her sister resting on the windowsill. It was not a lonely space. It was a space full of echoes. Echoes of laughter, of memories, of love that did not need to be loud to be felt. And now, when the light from the moon poured in through the window, casting soft, silver shadows across the floor, she would sit in her chair, breathe deeply, and think, "This is who I am now. This is all I need, and it's more than enough." In this little room, she had found something many chase for a lifetime, a sense of wholeness, a sense of home, not in things, but in herself. 7. Alone, but never lonely. There was a time when being alone felt heavy, not frightening, but unfamiliar. After decades of shared meals, shared schedules, and the quiet comfort of another soul in the room, the absence of that rhythm left its own kind of silence. But here, in this tiny home, solitude had started to feel different. She was alone now, yes, but not in the way people often imagined, not abandoned, not forgotten, not lonely. In truth, she had come to treasure the stillness. It gave her space to think, to create, to simply be. No explanations, no compromises, no need to play a role or wear a brave face. It was freedom, wrapped in quiet. Still, there were moments, soft, unannounced, when her thoughts would drift back to him. He had been a good man, not perfect, but good in the ways that mattered, kind in the small, steady ways. He made her laugh, even when she didn't want to. He had a way of placing his hand on the small of her back at just the right moment, silently saying, "I'm here." And even now, all these years later, there were days when she would hear his voice in her memory as clearly as if he were standing right beside her. Some nights, she dreamt of him. In those dreams, they were not young again. They were as they had been near the end, slower, wiser, worn but whole, and always together. Those dreams didn't make her sad. They were visits, gentle ones, and she welcomed them. She kept his memory close, but not in a shrine, not frozen in grief. In small, living ways. A framed photo on the shelf. His old flannel shirt folded in a drawer, she still opened now and then. The garden tools he once used, now hanging in her loft. Quiet, but still part of her story. Sometimes she would whisper to him as she moved through the house, not out of habit, but because it brought comfort. She knew, deep down, that love like theirs does not disappear. It just changes shape. He lived now in her strength, in her laughter, in the way she chose to keep going. He lived in her decision to build something new, instead of staying stuck in what was lost. And so, when she made tea in the morning, or watched the sun dip low through the west window, or felt the breeze lift her hair just a little, she would smile and think, "You'd love this too." Aloneness had become something different, not something to fear, but something to grow within. There was no longer a need to fill the silence. She had learned to listen to it. It spoke to her in memories, in dreams, and in the quiet, steady voice of a woman who had made peace with her past and who had chosen to live fully, even without someone walking beside her. Because being alone, she had discovered, did not mean she was missing something. It meant she was making room. For herself, for joy, and for whatever came next. A small life, rich with meaning. In the end, this tiny home was never just about downsizing. It was about realigning, about finding out what mattered, and letting go of what didn't. She had once believed that growing older meant slowly retreating from life, that the world would get smaller, and her voice would grow quieter. But she had discovered something unexpected. Smallness was not the end. It was the beginning. In 400 square feet, she had found something that most people spend their whole lives chasing, a sense of peace she could touch, hold, and live inside of every day. Her home did not have marble countertops or a walk-in closet, but it had sunlight that spilled across the floor just right in the morning. It had shelves with books she actually read and walls with art she actually made. It had windows that opened wide to let the breeze in and a door that always led her back to herself. It held no clutter, no chaos, no noise. Only what she needed. Only what she loved. Only what she had chosen to carry with her into this new chapter of life. And that, perhaps, was the quiet triumph of it all. After a lifetime of caring for others, of making space for children, family, obligations, and expectations, she had finally made a space that was only hers. There was nothing selfish about it. It was sacred. She sat on the porch most evenings now, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the sun lower behind her daughter's house. Birds chattered nearby. The breeze moved gently through the trees. There was no urgency, no schedule, just life, unfolding slowly. It was in that silence she often gave thanks, not always out loud, not always in prayer, but deeply, fully, for the years she had been given, for the people who still loved her, for the courage to let go of what no longer served her, and to embrace what did. She knew this life would not be perfect. There would still be hard days. Loneliness might knock from time to time. The aches in her joints would not disappear. The world outside would still move fast. But this little home, this small, perfect, personal world, would always be here, holding her, supporting her, welcoming her back to herself again and again. And as she stood in the doorway, looking out into the soft light of early evening, she smiled. Not because everything was exactly how she imagined it, but because she had finally found a life that fit her heart. A life that was simple. A life that was whole. A life that was hers.